The 8th chapter of Sri Caitanya Caritamrita is summarized by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Amrita Prabhavasya. In this 8th chapter, the glories of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda are described. And it also stated that if one commits offences in chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, he does not achieve love of Godhead, even after chanting for many years. In this connection, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur warns against artificial displays of the bodily symptoms called Ashta Sattvica Vikara. That is also another offence. One should seriously and sincerely continue to chant the Panchatattva names Sri Krishna, Sri Caitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Sri Vasudeva, Gaura Bhakta. All these acharyas will bestow their causeless mercy upon a devotee and gradually purify his heart. When he is actually purified, automatically he will experience ecstasy in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Previous to the composition of Caitanya Caritamrita, Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur wrote a book called Sri Chaitanya Bhagavatam. Only those subjects which were not discussed by Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur in his Chaitanya Bhagavatam have been taken up by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami to be depicted in Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. In his very old age, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami went to Vrindavan, and by the order of Sri Madan Mohanji, he wrote Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. Thus, we are now able to relish its transcendental bliss. So there's a few verses before the one we just recited, everyone, but they don't have a purport. So I'll just read the English translations and then text 4. I offer my respects to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by whose desire I have become like a dancing dog. Although I am a fool, I have suddenly taken to the writing of Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is known as Gaura Sundara. I also offer my respectful obeisances unto Nityananda Prabhu, who is always very joyful. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto Advaita Acharya, who is very merciful, and also to that great personality, Gadadhar Pandit, the learned scholar. And this is text 4. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto Srivas Thakur and all other devotees of the Lord. I fall down to offer them respect. I worship their lotus feet. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami teaches us to first offer respect to the Panchatattva, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, Advaita Prabhu, Gadadhara Prabhu, and Srivas, and other devotees. We must strictly follow the principle of offering our respects to the Panchatattva as summarized in the mantra, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Sri Vasudeva, Gaura Bhakta. At the beginning of every function in preaching, especially before chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We must chant the Panchatattva's names and offer our respects to them. Om Agyanati Nilandasya Imanjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Manitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vacharam Pangam Namhayate Vinyat Kripatamam Bhante Sri Guru Dinatana. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master has very kindly come, forced to open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. Offer my respects unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, the Saviour of all fallen souls. By his grace, even a lame man can cross mountains. A blind man can see stars in the sky, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Narada Muni asks the question, does not a thing, when applied therapeutically, cure a disease caused by that very same thing. And in his purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of if one consumes too much milk, especially in a hot climate like India, then one can get an upset tummy. But one can take more milk to cure that. But that milk product one takes medicinally is in a slightly altered form. It's yogurt, which is cooling to the body, whereas milk is heating to the body. And this, of course, is the principle of homeopathic medicine, which Prabhupada understood and sometimes prescribed in his former grihastha life as a pharmacist. And another example is given of sometimes we may step on a thorn doing Brajmandala Parikrama, especially going barefoot. But then we can take another thorn and remove that other thorn from our foot, and then we throw them both away so nobody else steps on them. So this is the principle of Shravana Kirtanam Vishnu Smana. We don't have to give anything up, we don't have to reject, we just have to alter slightly the type of hearing and speaking that we do. People are so much absorbed in so many mundane topics, but if we just change slightly to giving submissive oral reception, as Srila Prabhupada would often describe to Lord Sri Krishna's messages in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Caitanya, Caritamrita, and so on, then Srimata Swakata Krishna Punyashravana Kirtanya Hridanta Shtogya Balarama Vidinoti Suritsitam. Sri Krishna, who is the Paramatma, super soul, dwelling within the heart of every living being, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. So the key words in that verse are, of course, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee. That's a great challenge for any living entity who we've all been conditioned to so many lifetimes of material enjoyment. So then to purify those desires for material enjoyment and rather change them to doing activities, to hearing and speaking about Krishna's unlimited name, fame, form, pastimes, entourage, etc. That's a wonderful achievement if one can achieve that in this lifetime. That's actually what the human form of life is meant for. So Krishna comes regularly in different incarnations, and 5,000 years ago he appeared in the family originally of Kshatriyas, but then by his own sweet will the Lord transported himself to the rural environment of Vrindavan and performed his most delightful pastimes as a cowherd boy. And cowherds, and that is described as being very sweet. Cowherding, the nature of cowherding, not that I can speak from any experience, but I have good friends like Krishna Caitanya, Vaishyas who look after cows. Cowherding involves, you have to be, it's very sweet activity, but it's also, it's not a big position in this material world. It's full of intimacy. the cowherds and their cows and calves. And it's also very down to earth in the sense that cowherds have to be prepared to get their hands dirty in amongst milking cows and cow dung and cow urine, which are of course supremely auspicious whenever there is a deity installation. Those substances must be there, along with all of the wonderful other byproducts of mother cow, milk and yogurt and ghee and so on. So Krishna specifically wanted to appear in that without any awe and reverence. Unlike the Kshatriyas, even Brahmanas, they're offered a great deal of respect. So Krishna specifically wanted to enjoy himself in very humble surrounds with his most intimate and confidential associates. And of course, he did that very wonderfully, and those pastimes are very charming. If one can train one's mind to relish them, to study them very deeply, then one becomes very attached to that type of hearing, rather than the crazy goings-on of mundane politicians and big industrialists and so on in this world. It's far more relishing. There's so much more nectar to be had there. But of course it does take some discipline and some training. So similarly, Krishna came again just 500 or a little more years ago as these wonderful personalities of the Panchatattva. And it's interesting that Srila Prabhupada, when he gave directions who should be worshipped in the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, that he instructed on the central altar, their lordships, the Panchatattva, should be installed and worshipped, and they should all be life-size. Mahaprabhu, 7 feet tall, along with his associates. So, of course, Sri Radha Madhava are there, and the Sakhis, the principal gopis. And because Mayapur Chandradaya Mandir suffered attacks by dacoits, Bundas at different times in the early days, then it was decided to install a very ferocious form of Lord Narasimhadev, Ugra Narasimha, which is the exact moment when Lord Narasimhadev burst out of the pillar and was looking for the great demon Hiranyakashipu. So these forms are there, and of course they're being worshipped very gorgeously there in our Mayapur Chandradaya Mandir. And Mahaprabhu, of course, by his own wonderful pastimes, attracted so many fallen conditioned souls during his manifest lila. And he, of course, left behind wonderful instructions. His Shikshastakam prayers are there, which we recite every day, which is very wonderful. And similarly, he gave wonderful instructions to his principal associates like Rupa, Sanatan, Ramananda Roy, Sarup Damodar, and others as well. And Nityananda Prabhu, who was, I think, about 12 years older in age than Caitanya Mahaprabhu. After the two lords had inaugurated the Sankirtan movement in Navadvip, Mahaprabhu accepted the renounced order of life at just 24 years, on the verge of his 25th year, and on the order of his mother, Sachi Devi, Sachi Mata, he made his headquarters in Jagannath Puri. But he instructed Lord Nityananda that you stay in Bengal and deliver all of our countrymen. And I want you to get married. So Nityananda Prabhu was a little curious. My Lord, you've accepted the renounced order of life sannyas, and now I'm older than you. It would appear that Nityananda Prabhu must have been in his mid-30s, possibly a little older by that stage. But Caitanya Mahaprabhu replied that I am setting the example of a perfect renunciant in the renounced order of life sannyas. I want you to set the example of a perfect grihastha. So Nityananda Prabhu, on the order Caitanya Mahaprabhu, accepted that he is after all Balarama. And it's said that there is no difference between Krishna and Balarama except in coloration. They are identical. Lord Balarama has the colour of the foam on the top of the milk, pure white. Krishna is shyam, bluish black, like a monsoon cloud. Apart from that, there is no difference. And then the other slight difference is that Lord Balarama is the supreme personality of servitor Godhead. And he is always serving his younger brother and even expanding himself into so many different forms and serving Krishna in that way. So similarly, Lord Nityananda, he accepted this order to enter the Grihastha ashram, even though he had been his whole life a brahmachari avadhuta, and he married two sisters, Vishuddha and Janata. And he and his wife Vishuddha had two children, a daughter, Ganga, and an incarnation of Suradakshari Vishnu, who is Virabhadra, Goshai, sometimes known as Virachandra. And he, after the disappearance of all the lords, Sri Krishna, Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, and Sri Advaita, and interestingly, Virabhadra took initiation from his stepmother, Janata. So he became one of the many, but one of the very big, powerful branches of the Chaitanya tree. And he made innumerable disciples and spread the Sankirtan movement far and wide. So it is a glorious sampradaya, the Gaudiya sampradaya. It's a great privilege when we study the lives of the Supreme Lord when he appears in different incarnations, and similarly his exalted devotees. Then we can become inspired. There are times in religious traditions or spiritual traditions where there is need of a reformation or a revival. So this is very much the theme of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, when Europeans 500 or so years ago was sailing around the world in their sailing ships, bumping into different countries and islands, and their interest was very much economic development. In Europe at the time, of course, the Renaissance, there was a little bit of, you could say, scientific era was just sprouting, blossoming. But in India, Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, they were delving inward. They were making this journey inward, exploring the deepest understandings possible of consciousness and the super consciousness, the supreme consciousness, Sri Krishna. So, Lord Nityananda Prabhu is very wonderful. Of course, when he appeared previously as Lord Balarama, and I often think how fortunate we are here at New Govardhana, worshipping Radha Govardhana Day and Krishna Balarama and Shri Shri Gaura. Very, very fortunate indeed. Krishna Kirtan. We had a wonderful devotee here. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but some of us will remember Nrsingadeva Prabhu, wonderful servant of Srila Prabhupada's movement here in Australia for many decades. And Krishna Kirtan, he told me once how he would, and I always used to enjoy seeing him come to the Sunday feast, and he would always take a seat because his health was not great. And so he would always take a seat, if I'm not mistaken, on the steps over there, and sometimes Krishna Kirtan used to sit next to him, and Sringadeva Prabhu would gently elbow Krishna Kirtan and say, "Look at him, look at him." And he was meaning Lord Balarama. Isn't he beautiful? Wasn't it? He told me that once. But yeah, he is very, very wonderful personality. The original spiritual master, Lord Balarama, and so many wonderful pastimes of Balarama ji are there in Srimad Bhagavatam, such as the Lord's dispatching a Dhanukasura, the ass demon, donkey demon. On one occasion, Krishna, Balarama, the cowherd boys, they had already had their lunch picnic pastimes, but there were many hours of the rest of the day. And later on in the afternoon, the cowherd boys were all hungry, and so one of them suggested to Krishna and Balarama, you know, we're not far from Talavan, where there are tal fruits, which are very delicious. Apparently they only grow in India, I've heard. And they're purple and very succulent and very sweet, delicious. They're like a big palm tree. So Krishna said, let's go. But there was one demon, the donkey demon, Dhanukasura, who inhabited, that was his turf, you could say. He resided in that particular forest of Vrindavan. And as the cowherd boys of Krishna and Balarama entered the forest, Balaramji, he shook one of those tal trees, and some of the fruits began to land on the forest floor, and the cowherd boys were also catching some, and they were having great fun. But Dhanukasura was having a nap, and that woke him up. And as some of us, when we get woken up from a nap, we might be a little grumpy. So that was very much the case. Dhanukasura was very agitated, and he kicked Lord Balarama very severely on his chest. Lord Balarama's chest is hard like diamond, so there was no effect whatsoever. Rather, in a short space of time, Lord Balarama grabbed the flying hooves of Dhanukasura, twirled him around, threw him up into the tops of one of the tal trees, and Dhanukasura left his body, as did some of the other donkey demons who attempted to attack in similar fashion. So in a wonderful book which is called Sri Krishna Samhita by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in that book Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually describes or compares many of the asuras or demoniac personalities who were all friends of Kamsa and who were sent by Kamsa. Some were even brothers and sisters. And they were sent repeatedly to Vrindavan to try and kill Krishna specifically, because the The unembodied voice from the sky had indicated some time before, even on the sacred occasion of Devaki and Vasudeva's wedding day, when Kamsa, the brother of Devaki, was driving his sister and her husband in his chariot, and the voice boomed out that Kamsa, you fool, the 8th child of your sister will actually kill you. So these demoniac personalities, many had yogic powers, mystic powers. There was black magic and white magic, so they were all very demoniac personalities. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he describes that Dhanukasura symptomizes very foolish persons carrying around all of their bad and good karma without taking up Krishna's very generous offer. Sadhudamam purichagya mami kanshalanam raja ham sadhudyo mokshishyan masacha. I think probably the most quoted verse in Bhagavad Gita, 1866. Just give up all other forms of religiosity and surrender unto me. I will deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. So it's a very generous offer from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but many people don't take it up. We've taken it up and we've surrendered to Krishna, and we see the results are very wonderful. But ass-like persons, with all due respect, but this is how our acharyas describe them, they carry around with them very heavy burdens of bad karma and perhaps some good karma. And Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, in one of his many writings, he gives an interesting example. Many of us are familiar with the example of the donkeys in India, who many of us have seen, and still to this day. They carry the loads of laundry to the bathing ghat or the river where the washerman, Dobiwala, he spends his day washing the cloth and then drying it and then taking it home. So Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, he describes that type of donkey is actually, his life's not too bad, because he only has to carry the laundry to the river and then carry it back again at the end of the day. And during the day, the washerman ties him up under a tree and he gets, hopefully, to eat something. But the worst type of donkey, or the most unfortunate type of donkey, is the one who is not owned by the washerman, but rather he has to carry loads all day long, from morning to night. And he's, of course, constantly whipped with a stick, and those loads are very heavy. So, in this way, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he describes, he compares Dhanukasura. He also makes references to, in the first year of Krishna's life, we had Putana, Sakatasura, and Trinivata, who all attacked and tried to kill Krishna. So Shakatasura is also described as the cart demon. And similarly, persons carrying around heavy loads of materialistic aspirations and bad karma, even good karma. Whereas Krishna is very able and competent to deliver us by the agency of his representatives in this world. Our gurus and the Vaishnavas, who are very powerful. They can easily accept and then pass on up the chain of disciplic succession. There is a hierarchy to their lordships, Radha and Krishna. And at the time of initiation, that's why initiation is considered so crucial, the Guru, he accepts on behalf of Krishna and disciplic succession. gives us a clean slate to write on, just like every day. We wipe the board clean of the previous shloka, and then a new verse is added. So this is the wonderful mercy. Krishna has many energies, shaktis, but it's described that his Karuna Shakti is the emperor of all his multifarious energies. His energy of mercy is so merciful, and so we have to just take advantage of that mercy which is there for the Lord's devotees. So many wonderful pastimes are there. I was hearing the other day, this is interesting, because we have the Bhagavad literatures. Can anyone tell me what is the crucial ingredient in a drama? There's one word in particular which starts with a C. What must there be in drama for it to be a good drama? Anyone think? It's got to be something. Yeah, Prabhu?
Climax? Bill?
Yeah. There always is a climax. Comedy, yeah. That always makes a good drama. We've got to keep our sense of humour. It's not exactly, but they're good suggestions, and they're always there. Climax and comedy. Anyone think?
Chase of some sort.
Yes, we're getting a little closer here. Chase, yes. The specific word is conflict. The chase is good, yes. And in the great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharat, we have intense conflicts. There's always a hero, or generally a hero and a villain. And of course, the great hero of the Ramayana is Lord Ramachandra. It's interesting that Ravana made a fatal mistake, a fatal miscalculation. He's a great devotee of Lord Shiva, and he performed intense austerities, and Lord Shiva wanted and did give him benedictions. And he was a Rakshasa, Ravana, and he asked Lord Shiva, "You please bless me that I never be killed by a demigod, a Rakshasa, or to speak of lesser demigods like Chinnaras and the Apsaras, or Charanas I should say, Apsaras, Gandharvas and so on." But he forgot to ask for the benediction that he never be killed by a human being. So he was very dismissive when his sister Suparna had her face disfigured by Ram and Lakshman, and she went back crying to her brother Ravan, and so this has been done by human beings. And of course, it's a long story, but that was a miscalculation on Ravan's part, because he was in fact killed by a so-called human being, or at least appearing. Both Krishna and Lord Rama, they are described, their pastimes are described as Adi-lila, or human-like, and the two lords are described as Naladev. They appear to be human beings. Of course, they're the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they appear to be acting as human beings. So similarly, in the great epic Mahabharata, and this is interesting, Krishna Kirtan, I read this the other day. When Maharaj Yudhisthira, who you could say is the great hero of in the conflict between the Pandavas with Krishna on their side and the Kauravas, headed by Duryodhana and his 101 brothers, I believe. So when the great battle was finally fought and Yudhisthira Maharaj was entering Hastinapur to be coronated as the emperor of the whole world, anyone know what? I know I ask really tough questions, but I try to give hints. I'll give hints. First hint is Krishna Kirtan will know what type of animals were pulling the chariot on which the Pandava brothers and Krishna entered the city of Hastinapur. Anyone know? Thank you. And what sort of animals? Yes, I just got from Krishna Kirtan many bullocks. And there were 16 pure white bullocks, because after all, Yudhisthira Maharaj is the emblem of virtue, the son of Dharmaraj or Yamaraj, the embodiment of religiosity, and of course bulls are similarly that figure. So he and his brothers entered the great city with great pomp and pageantry, and on a beautiful cart pulled by 16 pure white bullocks. So I thought that was really wonderful description. So many beautiful descriptions are there in Vedic literatures. And of course, perhaps we'll finish just with Rupa Goswami's wonderful, encouraging words that Ado Shravatata Sadhu Sangasta Bhajana Kriya Tato Ananta Nivritti Shatato Mista Ruchistata. This is just the first part of two-part verse by Srila Rupa Goswami that describes the progress of an aspiring devotee of Krishna through the different stages of bhakti, beginning with faith, Shraddha. And from Shraddha, of course, we seek out like-minded persons, saintly devotees. Birds of a feather like to flock together. Adho Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha. And then Bhajana Kriya, which can be variously described as taking initiation, beginning the process of bhakti in earnestness. Adho Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya Tato Anartha Nivritti, very important. And similarly, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's comparison between the different demons, he also sometimes describes them as the different anarthas which one must rid oneself of. Anartha means something meritorious or worthwhile. Put an A in front of it, totally unnecessary. Anartha. So Anartha Nivritti means to gradually divest oneself from all of the unwanted, unnecessary desires. Anartha Nivritti Shatato Nishta. And then Nishta is a really fascinating stage before Ruchi, Ashakti, Prema and Bhava, because Nishta means firm determination. From the stage of Nishta, it's very rare that one will fall back to Maya. The Acharya is described like that. One becomes so fixed and is already getting some taste, some ruchi from one's devotional practices, that one's very unlikely to want to go back to material life. So nishta, firm faith and firm determination. So I might stop here, everyone. If anyone has a comment or question, please. Wants to be here at the farm for a few wet mornings. There might be a microphone. Just push it right over the room, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering about this anatta, the asalic mentality, carrying good or bad karma despite surrendering your free from it. So how to get rid of such a mentality?
When you do surrender in earnestness, in full, I'm sorry, I may be not absolutely clear. Can you rephrase your question just so I get it absolutely clearly?
Just the Dhinapasara represents that mentality of carrying good and bad karma unnecessarily. So how to rectify such an anatta?
Well, another wonderful verse which is repeated often throughout the Vaishnava literatures is Lord Ramachandra's promise that if one just once says, "From this day on, my Lord, I am yours." That's actually mentioned, that statement, in Caitanya, Caritamrita and in other. It's a very important statement. From this day on, my Lord, I am yours. Then at that time, Krishna, he takes. From time to time onwards, we should remember that, and if on occasion we find ourselves slipping a little bit on the path, then we have to at least adjust in our minds, and if we're being drawn in the wrong direction, we should sincerely pray like that as well, ongoing. That's Krishna's promise. That he'll take it away, and can very easily do that. It's like the sun can evaporate even the most nasty substances, and the sun doesn't become affected, supremely antiseptic. That help them? No, carry on. Distributed some books up north, Queensland. Nice. Excited. Anything else? Prabhu? Your microphone flies for the air.
Caitanya Mahabharat was another incarnation of this. In Caitanya Mahabharat's Shikshastra, he mentions even if Krishna hands me roughly by his embrace, formation Prabhu present before me is complete free to do anything everything. Sometimes I wonder how Krishna handles it roughly by his embrace. How does that occur? And why would he do that?
I can think of one story only off the top of my head, and that is Ramanujacharya coming. Actually, there's two stories. I'll tell this one first. When Ramanujacharya was again reinvigorating and reforming Vaishnavism throughout South India, standardizing the deity worship in all of the major Vishnu temples in South India, and eventually he came to Jagannath Puri. And he attempted to do the same thing there because he saw that some of the practices of the pujaris in Jagannath Puri, they were a little unusual. So he was about, the following day he was to have a very important meeting with all of the senior pujaris in the Jagannath Puri temple. But that night, before he had a chance to try to, there was some resistance. Some meetings had already been held, but there was some resistance from the pujaris. They would cite the long history that they had been performing tradition, this type of puja. So that night, he was actually, Ramanujacharya was kicked out of Puri by Lord Jagannath himself. He woke up 300 kilometers away. And Lord Jagannath said, he told him, I like the way my devotees are worshipping me here. And an even a more profound example is, and I'm struggling to remember his name, but it will come to me, Hare Krishna. And this pastime is mentioned right at the end of Caitanya Bhagavatam. And please, some of our pundits can help me out with the name of this personality. Hare Krishna. But it's a wonderful story. Very exalted devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who actually was the initiating spiritual master of Gadadhar Pandit, Pundarik Vijayanidhi. Thank you so much, Krishna Kirtan. So Pundarik Vijayanidhi similarly used to come to Puri regularly from Mayapur to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And on one occasion he noticed there's a festival where Lord Jagannath, Balarama and Subhadra are offered starched garments at the beginning of winter. And the long tradition was that the pujaris would not wash those garments before they offered them to their lordships, so they still had starch in them. So Pundarik Vijayanidhi, he saw the pujaris offering these unwashed starched garments to their lordships. Odan Shasti, if I'm not mistaken, is the festival. So he became very critical in his mind. Why these pujaris are not washing these new garments for their lordships? This is not proper. They should be washed. So he was very critical in his mind. That night he had a dream, and Lord Jagannath and Lord Balarama were slapping his cheeks. So he woke up in the morning with swollen cheeks, and he remembered his dream, and his good friend in Puri was Swarup Damodar. So he went to see, and he was a little embarrassed because he's got red swollen cheeks. And Swarup Damodar said to him, Pundarik, what happened to you? So Pundarik Vijayanidhi was a little embarrassed and very humble. He said, well, I wasn't going to tell you, but I had a dream and I got slapped around by Lord Jagannath. And he told him the story. So there are a couple of examples that I can... Is that all right, Prabhuji? Something.
They're good examples.
Sorry?
They're good examples.
Okay, thank you.
Just wondering, in our own personal life, sometimes we get, handled roughly by the material energy, and we feel we've been mistreated, unfairly mistreated. Is that Krishna indirectly handling us roughly?
You could
through the actions of others.
You could interpret it that way, and there are quotations from Srila Prabhupada and in Shastra, which, and of course, another famous verse from the Bhagavatam is let me go on suffering the reactions to my past misdeeds, knowing that Krishna, you're always minimizing those reactions, just giving me a little token. Instead of losing an arm, I just get a small cut on my finger. Let me go on patiently worshipping you in the core of my heart and tolerating these different reactions. Knowing that my final destination, living with you in your abode, is my rightful inheritance, just like children. They know that at the end of their parents' lives, they will inherit whatever wealth their parents have. So that's the realization of a devotee. And yet sometimes Maya may remind us, we may get a gentle slap or kick from the material energy. It may come in some form. We may even from either the Adi-voltic, Adi-idic or Adi-atmika miseries which are there, the threefold miseries, other living entities. Sometimes devotees go to Vrindavan, they get bit by dogs and monkeys. In Vrindavan, they get seriously ill, gravely ill. I swear I'll never go back to India. I got so sick, which is unfortunate. So many different miseries there. It's to remind us actually we don't belong here. We shouldn't get too comfortable here. Not a place for ease-loving, but actually we should stay fixed on coming back to Godhead. I better stop here. I've got 5 minutes over time. I've got some wonderful guests from Christian Village. The bell will ring, and as I go, Ramanandi, Shri Prabhupada Ki.